Hello and welcome to Whispers Reddit. We're thrilled to have you join our cozy corner where we dive into the most intriguing, heartwarming, and sometimes mysterious stories from Reddit. Whether you're here to unwind, get inspired, or simply enjoy a good story, you've come to the right place. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a whisper. Grab a comfortable seat, relax, and let's embark on this storytelling journey together. Thank you for being part of our community. Let's get started. My sister is due in early January, and we are planning her baby shower for early December. She decided she wanted to use my mother's maiden name, Rafferty, as her daughter's name, not a tragic day itself, and I suppose it works as a unique name. However, yesterday I texted my sister that I needed to order the custom items with my niece's name as soon as possible so they would arrive in time for the shower. My sister then let me know that she had finally chosen a sensible name for her child. My sister wants to spell our mother's maiden name Rari, so I texted back an alternate spelling of it. She asked what was so funny, and I replied with a series of laughing emojis. I tried to explain that no one would pronounce that as Rafi, and she would likely receive a lot of the same mispronunciations. She told me I was being ridiculous. I texted back my poor niece, little Miss F.Y. Ray, who was not invited to the shower, and my mother informed me today that my sister doesn't want me as the. We had an intervention on Ray Farty, and I know everyone said to send a link to the original post to my sister to show her that 103% of the world's population would call her daughter Ray F.Y., which would be the easiest thing to do, but some don't know if updates are allowed here, but here it is, and I apologize for the length and the difficulty I've been having submitting it. Is there a character limit? I'll try posting some and put the rest in the comments. I wanted to address a few points that were raised by commenters who said that I shouldn't bother paying for the baby shower anymore. I had no intention of ceasing to do so, and I had no plans to stop helping out with arguments and fighting. I love my sister and want her to enter motherhood with love and support, regardless of whether she wants my support or my presence at the event. Once my sister's husband was made. About a month prior to my initial post, he was aware that the spelling had changed from Rafi to Rayart. He claimed that he didn't give it much thought until he saw it written down and instantly recognized it as Ray Farty too. He claimed that her emotions had been deteriorating during the pregnancy and that he was unsure of how to approach her about returning to the original spelling. He had hoped that after she gave birth, all the hormones would somehow leave her body, she would come to her senses, and it wouldn't be a problem. Said some pretty awful things about her as well. My mom only knew that I had called her to complain that I had made fun of her for making a small spelling change, like Rafi, until I told her to get a pen and paper and I would spell it out for her. When she realized it was Rardy, she was team save this child. Now, for those of you who said I lacked tact, my reaction was mean because someone would call the poor girl Ray Farty for the rest of her life just to make my sister feel. Third, my sister is a bit of a joker, so at first I thought she was just playing a practical joke. She spent $400 on a mural painted on one wall in the nursery because she wanted to show off the finished nursery to everyone at the event. Putting the quirky pregnancy brain aside, I'm sure she would realize her child would be named Ray F.Y. once it's pointed out, have a laugh, and change her mind. This will end up being a funny story to tell at her daughter's future wedding or something. She also bought herself a birthing gift, which she would have my brother-in-law present to her in front of everyone at the hospital, a 1900-plus gold bracelet with our EFAT and Y charms. The baby book also has Ray F.Y. embroidered on the cover. I asked my sister's best friend Katie, who is not her real name, if my sister had told her anything about the spelling change. The baby shower included Ray Farty, which now needs to be repainted. Regarding Ray Farty following the argument with my sister, who wanted to win Katie over to her cause. Katie, a teacher, was equally appalled by the spelling and informed me that this was the worst attempt at a creative name she had ever seen. If you will, the Farty Party was an intervention in which my sister, her husband, his mother, and father were all present. My sister and Katie refused to accept that anyone could possibly see Ray Farty as Ray Farty, and we were only upset that she was using creative license, which is something everyone does. These days, my sister said that kids aren't that mean to tease her daughter because of her name. Katie responded that many kids are mean enough and the others would join in so they're not singled out. My sister retorted that as long as all the adults pronounce it correctly, there won't be any issues. Katie informed her that not only would the adults not know how to pronounce it in the first place, but that kids will immediately latch onto that as long as fart is in the name. I was glad Katie was present because I knew that my sister's opinion would likely be the only one to influence her, so I shared some interesting names her students had had over the past few years. After crying for 10 minutes or so, she finally agreed to completely change the name because even Rafferty was tainted because we had all ruined it for her. We told her to take her time and think of a new name, but she insisted that she still wanted to honor my mother, so she suggested combining my mother's first name with her mother-in-law's name and coming up with a crude term on the spot. It's been radio silence until my sister texted me a few hours ago to tell me that she and her husband found Theodora and she is completely in love with it. She even decided that my unborn niece looks like Theodora in the ultrasounds. She had those eerie 3D ones done where every baby looks like the same copper potato. When my mother brought that out, she started crying again and accused us of not letting her be a mother. Her husband suggested that we leave it for the time being and that we should all go give her space. Katie will be taking over as his godmother, which I'm okay with because I can always be the godmother for their next child, who will likely be named something like Tiramisu. Beautiful, and I'm so happy she's happy. It's not my taste, but at least it's not Theodoru or something like that. So there you go, my niece has been saved from being called Ray. I'm invited to the baby shower again, and I know this is just a little blip with my sister and we'll be fine. Thank you all for seeing the same thing. My name is Sarah, and I am 37 years old. I have been married to Mark, who is also 37, for 15 years, and our relationship began as a whirlwind romance filled with passion and excitement. We met in college, both majoring in literature, and our shared love of books and poetry quickly led to our husband's sudden development of an attraction towards me. I feel disgusted because this is the result of double standards and conditional behavior. Our early years of marriage were full of joy and adventure as we traveled to different countries, exploring new cultures and creating beautiful memories. We were each other's best friends and confidants. Mark was always supportive of my career and I was proud of his accomplishments. He was charming, attentive, and made me feel like the most special person in the world. We would spend hours talking about our dreams and aspirations, and it felt like we were invincible together. Felt like we were meant to be when we made the decision to have children. It was a decision that we both enthusiastically accepted, and the moment Emily was born was one I will never forget. Mark was an amazing father from the beginning, changing diapers, singing lullabies, and being there for every milestone. 2 years later, our son Jacob was born, completing our small family. Life was busy but rewarding, and we faced the difficulties of parenthood together. We were still a good team, but as the years passed, things started to change. The constant demands of raising 2 young children and the pressures of work began to wear us both down. I noticed that our conversations became less about our dreams and feelings and more about practical issues. The intimacy and romance that wanted to find our relationship seemed to fade into the background around this time, and I gradually gained some weight as I concentrated more on taking care of Emily. I gained about 20 pounds, but I didn't think much of it because I still felt good about myself, dressed nicely, took care of my appearance, and kept a positive outlook. I thought that my value wasn't related to my weight, so I carried on living my life with confidence until one evening, when everything changed. Mark and I were sitting in the living room after putting the kids to bed. It was supposed to be a calm night, but after a few minutes of silence, I could tell that something was bothering him. Said, "Sarah, I need to tell you something. I don't find you attractive anymore." His words hit me like a ton of bricks, causing my heart to sink and a lump to form in my throat.
"What do you mean?"
I asked, my voice trembling. "It's just that you've gained weight and I don't feel the same way about you physically." He avoided looking at me, and I was devastated to hear the father of my children, the man I had loved and cherished for so long, tell me that he no longer finds me attractive because of a few extra pounds. It felt like my entire life. I tried to contain my tears, but they came out uncontrollably. "I can't believe you're saying this. Do you have any idea how hurtful this is?" Mark looked uncomfortable, but he didn't take back his words. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I just wanted to be honest with you." His honesty felt like a betrayal. The world was falling apart. I had always thought that our love was deeper than appearance, that it was based on mutual respect, shared experiences, and emotional connection. I prided myself on my self-assurance and confidence, but his remark rocked me to my core. I started to doubt my value as a partner, my beauty and my worth, and I couldn't comprehend how the man who had once loved me could now view me as less desirable because of a little extra weight. In the days and weeks that followed, I fell into a downward spiral, feeling unloved and unwanted. Mark's lack of physical affection only made me feel even more inadequate, and even non-sexual affection like hugs and kisses became infrequent. In an attempt to make up for my feelings of being unworthy of him, I started to withdraw emotionally. I dressed stylishly, spent more time on makeup, and even changed the color and style of my hair in the hopes of rekindling our relationship, but no matter what I did, it never seemed to be enough. Mark remained distant and uninterested, and his rejection continued to weigh heavily on me. Over time, the emotional toll of feeling unloved and unwanted started to affect my physical appearance. The strain in our relationship was becoming more and more apparent, and Emily and Jacob were observant, and I could see the confusion in their eyes as they sensed the tension between us. I wanted to be strong for them, but I couldn't. I also gained even more weight and fell into a cycle of comfort eating to cope with my feelings of depression and low self-esteem. I felt trapped in a body that I no longer recognized, in a marriage that seemed to be falling apart despite my efforts to maintain a sense of normalcy for the sake of our children. I longed for the days when we were each other's everything, but I couldn't see a way to bridge the growing divide between us. In the months after Mark's confession, my life started to fall apart in ways I never expected, the lack of sexual and emotional intimacy becoming a distant memory overshadowed by feelings of rejection and inadequacy. It was heartbreaking to see how far we had drifted apart when I thought back on those early years of our marriage. I would lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, replaying his words over and over in my mind, "I don't find you attractive anymore." His non-sexual affection was like a constant reminder of my inadequacy, a silent affirmation of my deepest insecurities. Every touch that was withheld felt like a rebuke, and every kiss that didn't happen was an affirmation of my undesirability. The emotional distance between us grew wider every day, and I found myself sinking into a deep state of depression and self-doubt. Rejection echoing in the quiet moments during the day. When I was by myself, I put on a brave front for Emily and Jacob, but on the inside, I was crumbling under the weight of Mark's rejection. My once unwavering confidence crumbled under his critical gaze, and I started to see myself through his critical eyes. The mirror which I had used to adorn myself turned into an enemy as I examined every inch of my body, focusing on the flaws that I thought had driven Mark away. The weight I had gained after having children seemed to mock me, and each extra pound was a symbol of my. Food became both a comfort and a punishment. I would binge on junk food in an attempt to find temporary satisfaction, only to be overcome by guilt and self-loathing after the weight gain. I stopped meeting friends because I was too ashamed to face them for fear that they would see the cracks in my facade. Failure to maintain his interest caused my self-esteem to plummet, and with it, my sense of worth. Depression descended like a dark cloud, stealing the joy from activities I once loved. Was gradual but persistent as the weight accumulated, my energy levels declined, and exercise, which had previously been a source of empowerment and joy, became a futile endeavor. I was caught in a vicious cycle whereby the more weight I put on, the worse I felt about myself, and the worse I felt, the more I turned to food for comfort. Mark's rejection affected every part of my life, and I would catch him staring at me with a mix of sympathy and. The few times I tried to initiate intimacy, his apathetic reactions or outright rejections made me feel even more inadequate. His lack of interest served as a constant reminder that I was no longer desirable in his eyes, and even the most basic acts of affection, a hug, a peck on the cheek or a touch on the arm, were tense and uncomfortable. I missed the times when our physical connection was a natural extension of our love, but now, the few times we did have sex, it felt like a pointless act rather than a meaningful connection, and I would lie there going through the motions with thoughts of inadequacy running through my head. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that Mark was only going through the motions out of obligation and didn't want the passion and spontaneity that had once defined our relationship. Every touch seemed to come with an unspoken judgment, an unvoiced criticism of my changed body. I became hypersensitive to Mark's moods and reactions, constantly seeking his approval and validation when he was distant or critical, which reinforced my belief that I was failing as a wife and mother. When he was kind or complimentary, it felt like a temporary reprieve, a suspension of his disappointment in me. Intimate moments were replaced by a cold, mechanical routine. The emotional toll of Mark's rejection affected every aspect of our daily lives. It was a daily struggle to find the energy and motivation to keep going. The house, which used to be a place of warmth and love, felt cold, and taxing chores that used to give me a sense of accomplishment now felt like insurmountable tasks. I tried to shield Emily and Jacob from the turmoil in my heart, but they are sensitive and I could see the confusion and concern in their eyes. Mark's rejection also affected my work as a freelance writer. I had always prided myself on my ability to create captivating stories and meet deadlines, but now my creativity felt stifled and my productivity plummeted. I would sit in front of my computer staring at a blank screen, unable to summon the words that once flowed so easily. The deadlines loomed and the pressure mounted, but my mind was too overwhelmed to handle the pressure. I ordered takeout more often than I cared to admit that my neglect of these responsibilities only served to increase my feelings of inadequacy and failure. The woman I used to be, the confident, passionate and loving partner who embraced life with enthusiasm, was gone, but she felt like a distant memory overshadowed by the weight of Mark's rejection and my own self-loathing in the quiet moments. I was too overwhelmed with self-doubt and despair to function effectively, and I felt as though I was living in a fog that was disconnected from the world around me. I would cry until I was completely teary-eyed. As I walked this dark and lonely path, I couldn't help but wonder if there was a way back, if I could find a way to rebuild my sense of self-worth and reclaim the love and intimacy that had been lost, or if I was destined to stay stuck in this cycle. I mourned the loss of the intimacy and connection that had once defined our marriage, the loss of my self-esteem and the confidence that had once been my hallmark, and most of all, the loss of the belief that our love was strong enough to withstand any challenge. Of rejection and despair, the future felt uncertain, and the weight of that uncertainty was nearly too much to bear. After Mark's heartbreaking admission, I decided to do whatever it took to win back his attraction because I couldn't bear the idea of our marriage continuing in this distant, loveless state. Desperation drove my resolve, and I am now on a transformational journey in the hopes that changing how I look will spark our relationship again. To start, I worked on my fitness, joining a gym and committed to a strict exercise regimen that pushed my body to its limits in an attempt to lose the weight I had put on. I got up early to work out before the kids woke up, running on the treadmill until my legs felt like jelly. I hired a personal trainer to help me with weightlifting and cardio sessions, and I went to yoga classes to increase my flexibility and mental health. The physical effort was exhausting, but I persevered because I thought that having a fitter body might make me more attractive. In addition to my exercise routine, I completely changed my diet. I replaced comfort foods with salads and smoothies, carefully monitoring my macronutrients and calories. I researched the newest diet trends and spoke with nutritionists to find the ideal balance that would help me lose weight quickly. I stocked our refrigerator with fresh vegetables, lean proteins, and nutritious snacks, avoiding the processed foods and sugary treats that used to be my go-to comfort foods during stressful and depressing times. I also made the decision to change my concentrating more heavily on my hair, which had always been a source of pride for me. Mark had once remarked in passing that he thought certain hair colors and styles were more attractive, so I took his remarks to heart. I dyed my hair a different shade, trying out different hues until I found one that I thought he might like. I went from brunette to blonde before settling on a rich auburn in the hopes of catching his attention. I also changed the length and style, cutting it short and then growing it out long in an attempt to find a look that would rekindle his desire. During these changes, I looked to Mark for confirmation that my efforts were having an impact. I would catch him looking at me and wait for a compliment or a flash of interest, but more often than not, his responses were ambivalent. He would acknowledge the changes with a courteous nod or a quick "you look nice," but the passion and attraction I yearned for remained absent. Despite my tireless efforts, our sex life showed no signs of improvement. Intimacy remained rare, and when it did occur, felt emotionless and mechanical, so I kept starting in the hopes that this would be the night that things changed, but the results were always the same. Mark's lack of enthusiasm and disinterest were evident, and they only made me feel more frustrated and hopeless. As I changed my body, changed my diet, and even changed my hair, but nothing seemed to rekindle the spark, and I started to wonder if the problem might not be with my appearance. Every time he mentioned a preference, no matter how casually, I would incorporate it into my routine in the hopes that it would finally make a difference. For example, if he admired a celebrity's hairstyle, I would schedule an appointment with my stylist if he complimented a particular type of outfit. Between us, I felt like a stranger in my own skin, constantly adjusting to what I thought Mark wanted but never truly feeling like myself. I would purchase similar clothing, but as Mark's attraction remained elusive, my growing frustration started to show in other aspects of my life. I became irritable and short-tempered, snapping at the kids over trivial matters and withdrawing from social events. I felt like I was failing at everything, losing touch with the happy, self-assured person I used to be, and losing my self-esteem. The emotional toll was enormous, and I frequently found myself crying in private. Despite my best efforts to change for Mark, the fundamental issues in our relationship remained unresolved. It was painful to realize that my transformation might never be enough to restore our intimacy, and I was left wondering whether our marriage could survive without the connection and affection we once shared. As I embarked on my journey of transformation, I was overwhelmed by the sense of inadequacy and rejection as months turned into years. Restore Mark's appeal. I couldn't help but see the irony of our circumstances as I was tracking every calorie and working myself to the limit in the gym. Mark had gained about 50 pounds over the years, which was a huge difference from the active and fit man he used to be, but my attraction to him remained unwavering. I still loved Mark very much, and his weight didn't take away from the things that initially drew me to him: his intelligence, his sense of humor, and the warmth he could display when he let. It became more difficult for me to reconcile my continued attraction to Mark with his rejection of me. I tried to initiate intimacy frequently in the hopes of bridging the growing emotional and physical distance between us. I would put on lingerie, light candles, and create an atmosphere that invited closeness, but more often than not, my efforts were met. I found Mark to be vulnerable, and I longed to restore the closeness we once shared. One night in particular sticks out in my memory sharply because I had planned a special dinner to celebrate our anniversary, dressed in an outfit I knew Mark had liked in the past, and after dinner I led him to the bedroom in the hopes of a romantic evening. As I leaned in to kiss him, he pulled away and muttered, "I'm really tired, Sarah." Perhaps this was another instance where the sting of his words cut deep, and I felt a familiar wave of rejection wash over me. I went to bed that night feeling even more alone than before, my self-esteem falling even further. Mark's weight gain and our divergent experiences of attraction revealed a painful double standard in our relationship. I would initiate intimacy only to be met with excuses and disinterest, and each rejection eroded my already fragile self-worth and reinforced the belief that I was no longer desirable. I started to dread the moments when I would try to connect with Mark, knowing that I was likely setting myself up for more heartache. I accepted and loved him despite his physical changes, but he seemed unaware of the effort and sacrifice that went into it. It felt unfair and hypocritical, and it added to the growing resentment I felt. The constant rejections had a serious negative impact on my mental health. I fell deeper into depression, feeling unloved and unwanted. The emotional turmoil affected every part of my life, and I became more withdrawn, isolating myself from friends and family because I felt too ashamed to share the reality of my marriage, so I forced myself to act brave and act as though nothing was wrong, but on the inside I was fighting to keep it together. The dynamics of our relationship were profoundly affected. Our once strong partnership had deteriorated into a strident coexistence, and we spoke about less and less important topics, reducing our conversations to trivialities and logistical issues. The emotional intimacy that had once been the cornerstone of our marriage was replaced by a cold, uncomfortable distance, and I started to doubt my own. I would snap at Mark over insignificant things because I couldn't express how deeply hurt and betrayed I felt, and he would withdraw further. What did it say about me if the man who had promised to love me through thick and thin could no longer find me attractive? My self-doubt was crippling, and I found myself constantly seeking reassurance and validation, but Mark was no longer the source of comfort he once had been. Instead, he had become a reminder of my perceived failures. In moments of realization, I wondered if there was a way to break free from this vicious cycle of distance and resentment. The home that had once been a place of love and laughter had turned into a battlefield of unspoken grievances and unmet needs. I longed to express my feelings to Mark so that he would understand the extent of my suffering, but every time I tried to do so, the words caught in my throat. I was afraid of his reaction, afraid of being dismissed or misunderstood, so I remained silent, bearing the weight of I was at a crossroads, facing the harsh reality that something had to change, but I wasn't sure how to quickly find my way back to the love and connection we once shared. The relationship I had once loved so deeply seemed like a stranger, and the life we had built together felt like a fragile illusion. The double standards and constant rejections were tearing me apart, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could handle the emotional toll. 5 years later, my life has changed once more. After years of struggling with my weight and self-worth, I was able to shed the extra pounds and reach my starting weight. The journey was difficult, involving endless hours at the gym, careful meal planning, and unwavering dedication, but this time, I felt more motivated and enthusiastic about my everyday activities. I began re-establishing relationships with friends, attending social gatherings, and finding joy in the little things in life. I was rediscovering the woman I used to be, the confident, vibrant, and self-assured Sarah, and little things again made me feel proud of the progress I had made. Then, as if out of nowhere, Mark's behavior changed and he began commenting on my body, praising my new appearance in ways he hadn't in years. "You look amazing," he would say, his eyes lingering on me with a newfound appreciation. "I love the way you've done your hair," he added, running his fingers. His sudden renewed interest in me was evident through the strands, and at first I was flattered after years of feeling invisible. However, as the days passed, my initial delight evolved into something more complex and unsettling, and his compliments, while initially positive, started to feel hollow and objectifying. It seemed as though my value in his eyes was based only on my appearance, and I wasn't blind to the irony of the situation. Mark's renewed interest in me felt like a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it rekindled a part of our relationship, but on the other, it made me wonder if my value to him was really just about my appearance, and if all my efforts to improve myself had meant nothing more than fitting into his idealized image of beauty. I was at the same weight when he first told me he wasn't attracted to me, but now that same weight was enough to excite him. This realization was both frustrating and discouraging. That had been dormant for a long time, but it made me feel like an object valued more for my appearance than for who I was. His compliments about my body left me feeling objectified and disgusted, and I started to resent the fact that his interest was conditional on my physical transformation. The internal conflict this caused was intense. I yearned for a satisfying sexual life and the closeness and connection that had once been the cornerstone of our marriage, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that Mark's. I found it difficult to reconcile these conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to embrace Mark's newfound attention in order to enjoy the benefits of a rekindled sex life and the affection that came with it, but another part of me felt betrayed as if I were being reduced to a mere body stripped of the individuality and worth that went along with it. The attraction was superficial, as he was drawn to my appearance rather than the person I had fought so hard to become. I started to set boundaries, making it clear that while I appreciated his compliments, I needed him to value me for more than just my appearance. This internal struggle led me to a journey of self-discovery and self-worth. I started to delve deeper into my own needs and desires in an attempt to understand what I truly wanted from our relationship. I realized that I needed more than just physical attraction. I needed emotional connection, respect, and mutual appreciation. I also sought support from. I wasn't willing to settle for a marriage based solely on physical attraction. Instead, I wanted a partnership built on love, respect, and genuine connection. Looking back on my journey, I realized the importance of self-worth and the dangers of tying it to someone else's perception. I had spent years trying to mold myself into what I thought Mark wanted. Talking with friends and a therapist about my feelings and getting perspective on the situation helped me articulate my needs and find the strength to demand more from my relationship. Wanted only to understand that genuine happiness came from accepting who I was without regard to his approval. This newfound knowledge enabled me to put my own health and dignity first as I managed these tumultuous emotions. I found myself at a crossroads where I had to choose whether I could get past the objectification feelings and re-establish a relationship with Mark that valued who I really was. It wasn't an easy choice, and it required open communication, vulnerability, and a readiness to face the more serious problems in our relationship. Moving forward in my marriage, I knew that the road to recovery and relationship reconstruction would be difficult, requiring both of us to see past outward appearances and rediscover the intellectual and emotional bonds that had initially drawn us together. I was resolved to express my needs clearly in order to demand the respect and gratitude I was due and to make sure that our relationship was founded on more than just surface-level attraction. In conclusion, my journey of self-worth and self-discovery had brought me to a place of empowerment and clarity. I had realized how important it was to value myself and set boundaries in my relationship. Mark's renewed attraction had sparked a range of complex emotions, but it also offered a chance for growth and transformation. Whether we could overcome these obstacles and mend our relationship was still up in the air, but I was determined to put my own health first and make sure that my value was determined by more than just how I looked. I made an adult scene when My name is Laura, and I was 18 years old when I made a mistake that has plagued me ever since. At 38, I am a completely different person, responsible and deeply in love with my family, but the shadow of that one rash decision still hangs over my otherwise perfect life. I wake up every morning next to my husband James, the love of my life. We have been married for 15 years, and every day I am reminded of how incredibly lucky I am to have him in my life. We live in a comfortable suburban home with a white picket fence, a dog named Max, and a garden that James takes great care of. Our weekends are spent with soccer matches, ballet recitals, and family get-togethers. Having James by my side is my rock, my confidant, and my best friend. He knows me better than anyone else, or so he believes. Our two gorgeous children Emily and Noah are the light of our lives. Their laughter fills our home with joy, and watching them grow has been the greatest privilege of my life. I was just an 18-year-old girl just out of high school, eager to see the world, and I had a close-knit group of friends, but none were as dear to me as Lisa. We had been inseparable since middle school, and I trusted her completely. On the surface, everything in the movie nights is perfect, but deep down, there is a secret that I have carried with me for 20 years, a secret that could shatter this idyllic existence if it ever came to light. Lisa had always been interested in the entertainment industry and believed that her path to fame and fortune lay somewhere in the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. When she told me about an opportunity to shoot an adult scene, I was shocked, but Lisa's persuasive charm convinced me that it was a quick way to make some money and maybe even get noticed by someone important in the industry. It was her idea to travel to Los Angeles, the city of dreams, where anything seemed possible. I accompanied her to the studio. The place was a far cry from the glamorous sets we had envisioned. It was dim and impersonal, a sharp contrast to the bright lights and red carpets of our dreams. Lisa looked nervous, like I had never seen her before, and just before she was about to go on, she chickened out, her face going pale with fear. She pleaded with me to take over for her, saying that it would be short and that we could leave immediately after I hesitated. I had never thought I would do this, but Lisa was my best friend, and I didn't want to disappoint her. I put on a brave face, but inside I felt a mixture of shame, fear, and disbelief. As soon as it was over, I wanted to disappear. Lisa was waiting for me, her face a mixture of relief and gratitude. I left the studio in silence, the weight of what had just happened weighing heavily on me. I agreed that the scene itself was a blur, remembering the harsh lights, the coldness of the set, and the impersonal nature of the entire experience. Occurred between us, and I couldn't get rid of the regret that weighed me down like a stone that night. I sobbed myself to sleep, wishing I could go back in time and choose differently. Days passed, and I tried to move on from the incident, but then the video surfaced online. It was about the early days of file-sharing servers, and it spread quickly. Every time I saw a new link or heard someone mention it, my heart would race with fear, and I dreaded the idea that someone would recognize me. I enrolled in college determined to start a new life for myself after Lisa and I drifted apart after that summer because our friendship couldn't handle the strain of what had happened. I was afraid that my parents would find out, or worse, that my future would be ruined by this one mistake. Surprisingly, no one I knew seemed to see the video, as if I had been granted a small mercy. Slowly, the video seemed to fade into obscurity, buried beneath the avalanche of new content constantly being uploaded. A few years later, I met my husband, who was kind, loving, and everything I could have ever wanted in a partner. I never told him about the video because it was a part of my past that I wanted to forget, and I prayed that he would never find out. For years, I lived with the secret, constantly afraid that it might resurface. I would occasionally look for it online while holding my breath each time, but it never came up. However, when I met James a few years later, I started to think that perhaps I had been given another chance. Later, I was determined to move on from that chapter of my life, so I never told him about the video. He was aware of my crazy past, and he accepted it, but this was the one thing I couldn't bring myself to admit. As our relationship developed into love and eventually marriage, I prayed every day that he wouldn't discover that the video would remain hidden for years. Life continued, and I threw myself into the roles of mother and wife, but the anxiety never really went away. It was a normal Wednesday afternoon when everything fell apart. I had just finished cleaning up the kitchen after lunch, and as I sipped my coffee, my thoughts were already turning to the things I needed to do that day. I decided to take a quick break and catch up on some news, but I was distracted and started looking through my phone. Maybe it was just a gut instinct or just plain paranoia, but I decided to check one of the popular adult websites because it was a habit I had formed over the years to reassure myself that the video had continued to be buried, but this time as I browsed the website, my heart stopped there, staring back at me from the screen. The thumbnail image was unmistakable, and as I clicked on the link, my hands trembled and my heart pounded in my chest. The video then loaded, and I saw my 18-year-old self frozen in time, making the biggest mistake of my life. I felt sick, and I had to sit down to avoid passing out. Seeing it again brought back all the feelings of shame and regret that I had worked so hard to bury the fear of my. The idea of my husband seeing the video of my kids being teased by it was nearly too much to handle. I felt like that 18-year-old girl again, terrified and desperate for a way out. I knew I had to decide whether to tell my husband and risk ruining the life we had created together, or to hope that it would once more fade into obscurity and never be seen by anyone who mattered. I didn't want him to lose his trust or doubt our relationship. I made a mistake a long time ago, and panic struck right away. My mind was racing with ideas about who might have already seen it. My husband, our friends, or even our neighbors. What if one of my kids' friends happened to stumble upon it? The idea of my husband's coworkers or even our neighbors seeing it made my stomach turn. I couldn't let this happen, so I had to act quickly. I spent the next few hours desperately trying to get the video removed. I reported it to the website, begging them to take it down, but I knew the process could take days if. The following days were a blur of fear and desperation. Every time my phone buzzed with a notification, my heart would jump into my throat. I avoided social media out of fear of seeing a message or comment about the video. I spent weeks looking for contact information in a desperate attempt to find someone who could help me. Every minute the video stayed up felt like a lifetime, and the fear gnawed at me, a constant gnawing anxiety that made it hard to breathe. As I lay in bed one night, unable to sleep, my thoughts turned to my husband. We had built a beautiful life together over the previous 15 years, and he was my rock, my confidant, and the love of my life. We had weathered many storms together, but this time it was a storm I had created and I had kept it from him for all these years. The guilt weighed heavily on me, and I knew I couldn't keep this secret much longer, but the thought of telling him filled me. I had always prided myself on being honest with Dread, but this was a secret I had kept hidden deep, and now it was threatening to tear us apart. I pictured various scenarios in my mind, imagining how the conversation might go. In one scenario, he was understanding, holding me as I cried, and assuring me that we would get what I wanted. I feared all of these reactions with dread, including anger, hurt, disappointment, and the possibility that he would never look at me the same way again. The emotional struggle was nearly too much to handle. On the one hand, I wanted to be honest, put everything out there, and hope for the best, but on the other hand, I was terrified of the possible outcomes. The idea of him seeing the video and hearing what I had to say was intolerable. In the worst-case scenario, he was devastated, his trust in me shattered, and our marriage was left hanging by a thread. Because of a mistake I made so long ago, I didn't want him to feel insecure or inadequate. As the days stretched into a week, the pressure increased, and I found myself withdrawing from him out of fear that he would notice something was wrong. He naturally asked me if I was okay, so I forced a smile and told him that I was, but on the inside, I was crumbling because the guilt and fear were eating away at me, and I knew I couldn't continue this much longer in the gentle embrace of dawn. The man sleeping peacefully next to me was James, my partner of 15 years and the pillar of strength in my life. Little did I know that the foundation of our shared existence was on the verge of collapsing that morning, which unfolded like any other cloaked in the comforting rhythms. He appeared suspended in a serene stillness, a stark contrast to the turmoil that churned within the walls of our home. I, Laura, lay awake long before the alarm clock's call, caught between the lingering vestiges of sleep and the sobering reality that awaited with the rising sun. I left for work with a kiss and a casual goodbye, unaware of the approaching storm. James had taken the day off to tackle some long-overdue home improvements, a rare opportunity for him to indulge in the quiet satisfaction of manual labor. These were the moments I cherished, the laughter and squabbles of our children, the simple yet profound joy found in the minutiae of family life, and a stark contrast to the reckless shadows of my youth. That would soon consume our lives. The day went by in a blur of routine tasks, and when I returned home, the air felt heavy with tension that made my heart race. James was sitting at the kitchen table, holding an artifact from my previous life, my old laptop, which I believed I had permanently hidden away in the dusty confines of our attic. The screen showed a paused video of a reckless moment from 20 years ago that I had never intended for anyone, least of all myself. The video was from a time when I was another person, naive and impulsive, making decisions without considering the far-reaching consequences. As James pressed play, the laughter and carelessness of my 18-year-old self filled the room, a haunting echo of a past I could no longer escape. James asked, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions, the shock and disbelief in his eyes, as he said, "To see Laura, we need to talk." I was more deeply hurt by James's eyes than by any words, and I stammered through my explanations, each sentence laden with regret. It was a mistake, a moment of foolishness, and I'm not that person anymore. I pleaded, my voice heavy with tears, but James's face was a mask of betrayal and anger, and every word seemed to deepen the rift between us, his trust crumbling under the weight of my hidden past. Our home, which was once a haven of love and understanding, became a battleground of emotions as our conversation continued into the night, filled with tears and accusations. James struggled not only with the video's existence but also with its effects on his relationship and self-image. He felt deceived and began to doubt not only the truth of our past but also all of the truths we had shared, asking himself, "I look at you now, Laura, and all I see is a lie. How do I trust anything anymore?" His words pierced the air with a heavy emotional toll that I had unintentionally caused. Weeks went by, each day serving as a reminder of the growing distance between us. The laughter that once filled our home was replaced by an oppressive silence that spoke volumes. Our attempts to regain the ease of our relationship felt forced, a sad pantomime of a happiness that was slipping away. Despite my desperate attempts to bridge the gap between us and heal the wounds of the past, I watched as the man I loved struggled with the pain I had caused with a moment of indiscretion long buried. James, whose face was etched with sorrow and resolve, stood before me and said, "I can't do this, Laura. I can't be the man you need me to be. With this between us, it's over." His words were final, shattering the last vestiges of hope I had as he packed his belongings, each one a testament to the life we had built together. I felt a great sense of loss. The future we had imagined and the plans we had made were all in ruins at my feet, and the door closing and the last echo of his departure signaled the beginning of my. The poignant story of Laura and James serves as a rich narrative full of vital lessons about relationships, personal integrity, and the complexities of human interaction. At its core, it implores us to consider the long-term consequences of our actions, particularly how choices made in moments of youthfulness have affected our lives. Alone in the crushing silence, I was forced to face the magnitude of my past mistakes and the ruinous impact they had wrought. It was a painful but necessary reflection on the consequences of actions long thought forgotten. Impulsivity can have unanticipated and frequently painful effects on our lives. Laura's story highlights the stark reality that decisions we make can have delayed consequences that can change the trajectory of our lives. An 18-year-old's carelessness later turned out to be the cause of the breakup of a long-term relationship, highlighting the significance of having foresight when making decisions, particularly in the digital age where moments are recorded and preserved forever. Understanding that decisions made today can become burdens or lessons learned tomorrow, entering into a marriage or other significant relationship without being completely honest creates a precarious foundation. Laura's decision to keep her past from James, despite her fear of losing him, ultimately resulted in an irreversible breach of trust. This story strongly encourages openness and honesty from the beginning of a relationship, especially when sharing details about one's past that could have an impact on the relationship later on. Is vital because it not only promotes trust but also deepens understanding and empathy between partners. Laura and James's story emphasizes the importance of having an open and honest conversation because their incapacity to do so after the revelation demonstrates how important it is to develop these skills. Partners should make an effort to listen, genuinely express feelings without accusation, and seek mutual understanding rather than victory and disputes. Bridge rather than a barrier in comprehending one another's viewpoints and experiences. Laura's emotional turmoil resulted from years of concealing a significant portion of her past from those we love. This story highlights the value of living authentically and how our communication and behavior can foster real relationships where both partners love and accept each other's holy imperfections. The story also emphasizes the significance of not letting past mistakes control our future. Laura's journey toward self-forgiveness and personal development following the breakdown of her marriage teaches us that, although we must accept responsibility for our past deeds, we should also make an effort to move past them. This entails making the deliberate choice to learn from our mistakes, make amends where appropriate, and then put them behind us so they don't continue to cast a shadow over our lives. Finally, relationships frequently serve as mirrors. In essence, Laura and James's story is a tale of loss and regret, but it also serves as a beacon pointing the way toward a more conscious, honest, and communicative way of being. It reminds us that part of being in a relationship is helping each other through these vulnerabilities, offering support, and growing together through challenges. James's reaction to the video is not just about betrayal, but also about how external situations can trigger internal insecurities and doubts. Of living and loving, it teaches that, even though the truth can occasionally be painful, it is always the way to a deeper connection and, in the end, personal liberation. The story's main characters are as follows. The entitled neighbor will be referred to as N in the future, and the entitled neighbor's pampered child will be referred to as S for entitled son. The previous owner of our house, known as P, will also make an appearance. It's in a minor role, and remember that we've owned the house for more than 15 years, so unless otherwise noted, you can assume that most events took place over a fairly long period of time. Let's begin so that we can build up to the climax and set the scene for the events that took place. I must first give some background, most of which happened before we bought and moved into this house and owned a sizable plot of land down the road from a well-known recreational lake in our neighborhood. The properties here aren't so expensive that ordinary people can't buy them, but there are some incredibly valuable properties down the road and very wealthy people pass by all the time. This will become relevant later in the plot. Karen, who was fairly affluent and had a considerable amount of property, decided to divide it into 4 nearly equal pieces when her fortune changed. This is despite the fact that she lives on the only road that connects many lakefront estates and resorts, as well as the most popular boat dock on this side of the lake. When her children reached adulthood, she gave one to her daughter, who is surprisingly respectable considering the rest of her family. She then gave another portion of the property to S, building homes for them on both properties essentially in accordance with her children's needs. On the 4th piece of property, which excluded her own home, she constructed a small convenience store, which will also be helpful in the future, possibly to prevent arguments, but she ultimately gave her children the deeds to their various homes and properties. The respectable daughter was fairly respectable, but the irresponsible son was a party animal. At the time, everyone in the neighborhood hated him because he would throw loud, rude parties almost every night, keeping everyone up. The police must have had someone stationed nearby, which surely did not help his entitlement that his mother paid all of his bills for him and kept everything in her name, including the electricity and water. And trash, all of them went to her mailbox, with the exception of one, since the property was in his name, as were the property taxes, which he never paid and instead disregarded. I guess and didn't give it much thought or assumed he would pay for it himself. In any event, it wasn't shocking when the police showed up at his house, but it was when he didn't come back and the house was put up for auction. The house was in a state of disarray, with holes in the drywall and a big hole in the living room floor that led down into the garage basement. The bank said that the residents' recklessness and partying habits made the kitchen floor and subfloor completely redone, and that almost all of the walls were covered in muck. As a result, the only people who could afford it were those who were willing to pay for it themselves. Enter Pooh, a house flipper who retired in FLI properties to stay involved and active, would buy a house like this at auction for a low price, fix it up, and then resell it while he worked on it. Usually, by the time he finished fixing one and buying the next, his profit had nearly dried up. Any money left over would go into an emergency savings fund, which he described as nothing special. In any case, we were looking for a new apartment but couldn't afford anything too expensive. We found this place for sale on a website and thought it was fantastic. It was the right size and the right location, and even. We drove by to take a look at it and found that the owner was working on it. We came in to say hello and asked about the price, and he said that he intended to fix it up and sell it, and that his realtor had recently added it to the website's database to speed up the process. It was located down the road from the lake where we enjoy fishing and boating, so everything seemed to be perfect in almost every way. However, we were a little worried about the pricing, which had not yet been mentioned online, but it wouldn't hurt to check. When he was ready to sell, we sat down and had a nice conversation with him. He was friendly and enjoyed our company. We said that we would be happy to buy it from him for a fair price considering its current condition and the work he had already put into it. He had it about halfway built. We mentioned that we wanted to finish it and make it our forever home, but he declined, saying that he had already received multiple offers for it and did not feel comfortable selling it to us before it. When he was done, he suggested that we buy it at full price. We thanked him politely and left our phone number, asking him to call us if he changed his mind. Less than 2 weeks later, we got an unexpected call from him, saying that he would not have the time or patience to finish the house because his sister had become ill in another state and that he wanted to visit her. He also said that the house was not up to code, but if we could find a way to buy it, he would be happy to sell it to us for a reasonable price. We enthusiastically accepted the price and started looking for banks. Through a realtor acquaintance, we were able to find a bank willing to lend us the money to purchase the house, but with some restrictions. Basically, we would have 2 weeks to bring the house up to code, failing which they might default on the loan and put it up for auction. After explaining the situation to the PO, he promised to assist as much as he could, but he was in such a rush that he was unable to do any work on the house. After all of his hard work, the house was so close to being code compliant that we could have done it ourselves, but just in case, we called in a few friends and finished it in half the time. He explained to us how much time, effort and money it would take to get it up to code and meet the very minimal criteria. He even promised to help us in another way. We took out a loan for twice the amount he asked for the house and he returned the other half. We used that money to restore the house. There was still a lot of work to be done, so we spent several months refinishing the subflooring and flooring, rewiring the cables, fixing wall cracks, and replacing the old unsightly and actually rotting wallpaper that was affixed directly to the wall. You get the idea that we had put a lot of work into the place. Finally, we were able to move into our dream home, though there were still some issues that we would take care of later. We hadn't even finished moving in when Anne came to introduce herself, and repeatedly warned us about Anne and her conceited attitude as we were figuring things out in the very little time we had. Anne was initially quite amiable, and we didn't understand why she had warned us about her so frequently. Then, as we were wrapping up our call, she gently and sympathetically informed us that our house actually belonged to her, and that we had 30 days left. She said she felt terrible for us because we had been so badly duped, but she had no right to sell her house to us at all. You can imagine our panic when she revealed all of this to us. Terrible stories about people being duped like that before. We had spent a lot of time, money, and effort on this horrifying dream home, and now we were going to lose it all at once because we fell for a scam. We said we would talk to PA and the bank to sort things out, and we thanked her for her friendliness and for her clarification. The bank confirmed that PA was the real deed owner, and when we spoke with them, we spoke with the realtor, who also attested to the same thing. PA told us that they had been harassing him about the house all the time and that they had accused him of stealing it after he bought it at auction. Everyone we talked to told the same story, and we even went to the courthouse to make sure our name was on the deed. During this process, we heard a story from several neighbors. Shortly after this, and asked when she could expect us to be moved out. We told her that since we were the legal owners of the property, it would never be possible for her to lose the property that we had nothing to do with. Then, in the midst of the confusion of her child's detention, she began a lengthy SOB narrative about how this property had been in her family for generations and how she couldn't bear to lose it. We acknowledged that it was probably quite difficult to lose her family property like that due to her son's carelessness, but that wasn't our fault. We were just giving her a property we had purchased with our own hard-earned money and had worked so hard to restore. Considering that we paid about $150,000 for the house from PO and that he was still only making a small profit on it despite all the work and materials he had put into it before selling it to us, we asked why they didn't bid for the house and buy it back after he lost it. They could have had it back and paid almost nothing at auction, claiming that they refused to pay for something that was rightfully theirs and that they believed the house and possessions were being taken from them. We apologized once more, but however, we were understanding of her situation and offer her the property for a very fair price of $110,000, which, considering its location and state of repair, is still more than half of its overall market value. We felt that this was a fairly reasonable price after buying it from PO for $150,000 and adding another $30,000 for materials and months of arduous labor to repair it. We emphasized that with all the time, money, and extra supplies we had spent just to make her happy, there was no way we could afford to lose the property. When we told her that we had paid PO $150,000 for the house, she became enraged and said, "I know how much work you put into it and that we had to buy a lot of supplies to restore it, so she would be gracious and throw in an extra $10,000 for all the house we worked on." We said nothing, and if she wanted to negotiate with us, we would even be willing to drop to $90,000. She immediately countered with $40,000, saying she shouldn't have to pay anything at all for something that was rightfully hers. We kindly asked her to leave our house, saying that she was no longer welcome here and that we would never sell our house to her, even if she gave double the market value. She was obviously upset by this, and as we were leaving the door later, she threw all kinds of slurs at us, saying that the house was a complete mess and that it was hardly worth that much. She had also started calling our dream house a dump after all the work, sweat and tears, not to mention the money we spent on it. We found that she was spreading a variety of lies about us throughout the neighborhood, saying that we had taken her house and engaging in other foolish behavior. At first, we thought no one would believe it, but then a man with a gun barged into our driveway and threatened to evict us. Although we had never met him, we had heard of him, who was presumably the neighborhood's peacekeeper, and he challenged anyone who caused such commotions, claiming that he was a good, reasonable man most of the time. Since our neighborhood is a relatively rural one with many law-breaking residents, the majority of the locals really appreciated his presence. In fact, he frequently went above and beyond what the police did and worked hard to keep the peace. Just so you know, our neighborhood is divided into two main sections. One is primarily occupied by senior citizens and is peaceful and quiet, with everyone getting along there, and the other is teeming with the less law-abiding people, farther into the bush and away from curious cameras. Since we didn't know what was going on, we let him bring his gun but told him that we would be carrying our own as well. If that means anything, practically everyone in my town owns a gun, and there are more gun stores than dollar stores, so we weren't particularly concerned about him carrying one. We lived on the edge of the quiet section, a mile or so of farmland and woodland. We then decided to test that theory after learning about him previously and assuming from descriptions that this was the same man. He said, "Hey, I'm capable of defending myself if this gets out of hand, and if someone pointed it at you, which he didn't, that would tell another tale." To return to the main narrative, he said he thought it was something like that and apologized for the misinterpretation after a few hours of talking and situational explanation promising not to happen again. He also said that after becoming enthralled in the reports, he turned off a switch and praised us for buying the house, claiming that everyone was much happier after and moved out and that he didn't have to listen to people complaining about loud music and drunken high school students stumbling across the street in the middle of the night and nearly getting run over. We all laughed heartily about it and he left without saying anything else. This is also a significant turning point because Mr. Peacekeeper felt that the rumor could be used so easily, even though it's a bit of a side story. Downhill, let's get started. The events of this side story do somewhat overlap with those of the following plot point. I then mentioned that Anne had divided up a portion of her property to open a convenience store. This store was popular in the neighborhood and because it was in a prime location, it was well liked. However, their prices were unpopular, they significantly overpriced everything, and their customer service was essentially limited to saying thank you for your purchase as you left the door. Good, I guess, because sometimes they would give you a refund if you found mold on the food you bought from them. Nevertheless, they were fairly popular because for most people, they were the only convenience store in miles. So if you needed to buy groceries and didn't want to drive all the way to town, they were just a hop and a hop away. In fact, we even put aside our disagreements and went there quite a bit because they were practically next door. Aside from that, though, their modest store's popularity helped them to build a good reputation in our. Everyone in the neighborhood wanted to keep their handy little store, so they would challenge anyone to try and take it away from them. I suppose I could kind of see the emotion there, and that was back when everyone thought Anne and her family were good people, so they listened when Anne started spreading rumors. Everyone knew that was ridiculous, so the stories about us stealing an entire house from her simply flew over, but they still mostly thought she was trustworthy, so trust me, there were plenty of them. But let me clarify that even if all of the accusations against us were true, there were much more things that could be said about some other people in our neighborhood, so no one ever gave them any thought. And obviously didn't agree with us, so no one wanted to be on her bad side in case she banned us from her store, so they turned away from us, let us run wild, and allowed her son to return after a few years when he was finally. After being released from prison and finding no other place to live, she rented him an apartment above her convenience store because she didn't want him living with her and forbade any wild parties on her property ever again. All he had to do was run the business for them when they were busy, which wasn't very often, so he didn't really have to pay rent. Despite this, Anne's son didn't learn his lesson, and he would routinely double charge items while operating the register and obviously pocket the extra money. We returned. Anne was fairly entitled, but she did not go so far as to engage in obviously illegal activity. We loved her small business and wanted nothing to happen to it. Instead of thanking us for bringing this to her attention, she told us that we were seeing things and gently advised us to screw off. However, after repeated discoveries of this, they usually used the broken register as their justification. After noticing a trend, we told Anne that her son was probably pocketing the money and was double billing people for products. We dutifully complied with her request and, thanks to Anne, sent the information to a few of our neighbors. It had taken years for us to finally get to the point where some of them would even look at us, let alone talk to us, even though we had become friends. Nevertheless, they thanked us, even though they told us they didn't really believe it. The news quickly spread throughout the neighborhood, and Mr. Peacekeeper quickly arrived and stopped in our driveway once more, but this time he was much friendlier and knew that most of the rumors about us were untrue. He generally ignored them, and ever since, we have had numerous conversations with him, mostly on more amicable topics rather than serious ones. Occasionally, he stopped by for a beer and asked us about a few things. He did this with everyone, speaking to most people at least once a year to stay up to date and make sure everything remained peaceful and in order. He decided to do his job better so they wouldn't have to, because he didn't like the idea of police hovering over everyone, including us. He thought this was a great setup because it allowed you to let your kids walk down to the lake alone from the worst parts of the neighborhood. However, he didn't like the stories we were spreading about our neighbors, especially about their small business. He claimed to have already spoken with them and they felt misunderstood because of registration issues, so he told us to stop. He truly loved and would typically take her word over ours, so we agreed and apologized for any issues, saying that we truly felt insulted and that we really wanted to defend the few friends we had made in the area. He left without saying much after accepting an offer of forgiveness, even though we knew he probably wouldn't accept it even if we could show him evidence. Since and waved it off as a register error, there was probably nothing we could do to convince him. After we apologized and issued a final warning, we simply listened and made the decision to stop shopping there until it was absolutely necessary. However, 2 more years later, everything changed when Mr. Peacekeeper personally went around telling everyone that the rumors were false and that they were started by us because of our property dispute with Anne. People actually began paying more attention to their receipts after they had shopped there and noticed the same patterns that we had once we had brought it to their attention. The rumors spread throughout the neighborhood and most definitely knew about it, but she chose to do nothing and instead try to keep people quiet with stories about how Anne's son probably made a lot of money during this time. Small country stores like that, however, are totally dependent on the locals who live in the area where they are located. During the sunny months, they make a lot of money, but not enough to last through the winter. Then, at last, Mr. Peacekeeper connected the dots, and he was furious. And was right there with him. Not only did he go off on them, but he also went door to door that same day, telling everyone in the neighborhood exactly what they were doing. He even carried a stack of receipts with him to show anyone who needed proof. Now, Mr. Peacekeeper was the one in the community who was trusted more than Anne, and in just one day, he had completely destroyed their business. We could hear him cursing and son to his face from the next door. Residents in the area stopped going on vacation, and winter visitors who didn't know anything helped them do okay during the summer. However, when winter arrived and the crowds dispersed, they started to lose money. 2 winters later, they were forced to close their store for the winter, which meant that they had to buy everything new every spring and throw out over 90% of their inventory every fall. After 3 more years, they finally closed permanently because, I suppose, their expenses were not very low at the time. Their reputation in the community started to deteriorate, and as a result, people began to truly value us more. Finally, we were able to make some friends without having to put in much more work, and people stopped ignoring us and treating us like we were afflicted. And this was just the beginning. I regretfully have to add a little more history to bring the story to a close, but it shouldn't take too long, or at least I don't think so. Seems to be quiet, I mean pretty noisy, and we can't even go outside without her watching us through her window, going outside to walk her dog, pick up her grass, pull weeds, or whatever other excuse she can think of at the moment. If we are walking around our property, we obviously aren't on the best terms with her and don't particularly want someone looking at everything we do, but we have nothing to hide and we really don't want to be watched when we're trying to relax in our swimming suits. Plans to install a small pool and hot tub outside the back, so we started looking into a privacy fence in an effort to be good neighbors. We gently informed and that we planned to build a fence, to which she strongly objected. We explained that we still had to live with her, so we offered to discuss the fence's details with her, including its color and other details, since she seemed to enjoy looking at our property the most and we wanted to make sure she wouldn't have to spend all day every day staring at something that she thought was ugly after all the nonsense she's put us through. But to get back to the story, we planned to put the fence a foot over on our land across the entire property boundary only to prevent any disputes because we wanted to make sure there were no disagreements regarding its placement. By the way, before she left prison, we paid for a copy of the deed and to be honest, we also got a map of our property lines at the courthouse. Our property is more of a half hexagon or trapezoid form than a straight box property, as you find in several states where I live. In any case, the deed and property map show that a small triangle segment forms out of a line of trees cutting across some of our property. The trees, however, give it the appearance of a square. We were shocked to learn that she claimed about 1/3 of our land, and she even had a garden and a small hut on it. We lived here for years, thinking it was rightfully hers, and paid relatively little attention to the land. So we offered to sell it to her or perhaps trade it for a piece of her property so that everyone would have things simpler. She owned some land that connected to ours that was somewhat difficult to maintain, and expanding at a small distance would greatly simplify things. Her ownership on the other side of the trees completely flipped out once we brought this up to her, calling us liars, thieves, and all kinds of other things. Not to mention that it would give us more room to pursue our interests. She claimed that she would never pay for anything that already belonged to her and that she would never even consider giving us her property for nothing, especially after we took it from her. Since then, we have been involved in a major, ongoing property dispute. As I previously mentioned, my home is in a fairly rural area with many odd property lines. It would be understated to say that there are numerous property conflicts in our neighborhood, and that in some cases, a very small fraction of property might be worth a lot of money. This is because many of the documents are hundreds of years old, and instead of using X feet in Y direction, they use temporary markers like large oak trees to large rocks next to streams. Many of these sites could be describing multiple things, or they might have disappeared more than a century ago. Draft many very strict laws and regulations governing property disputes, surveyors, etc. As an aside, a few years ago a landowner won a property battle against a very large firm over 0.1 acres of land, paying the man over $1 million and hurting the business. Going back to the topic, she created our property lines, but more recently they were more straightforward. This does not alter the fact that property rules are quite strict, particularly when it comes to surveyors, as in the example above. Could be easily purchased by a large corporation that would lose millions of dollars for a small plot of land, making it unjust to the rightful owner. Therefore, how should one balance that? By lying, you make it so that the person who purchased the surveyor or forced them to do so loses everything, and the surveyor, in accordance with our state statutes, would be severely fined, lose their license, and never be allowed to conduct another survey in the future. Additionally, if they are found to be accepting bribes or blackmail, their former clients may sue them for any damages resulting from any changes to the property line caused by their inaccurate survey. They must also notify and reimburse all of their customers for up to 10 years prior to the incident. The clients may then decide to pay for a second survey by a non-affiliated surveyor at the expense of the original surveyor, which includes all clients up to 10 years prior to the incident. Surveyors in my area are particularly likely to aggressively avoid anything even remotely resembling a property dispute, so when a conflict arose, you might imagine it not as simple as it seems. This is because they are required to charge appropriate rent for any property the surveyor may have neglected during that time. If a surveyor is found to be receiving a bribe or blackmail, all damages and additional charges go toward the person who paid the bribe or extortion. Calling a surveyor down here was also an unexpected financial outlay. She found someone before we could find someone, so I assume she bought them or something because they showed the property line exactly as she had described, with the exception of one minor detail that she likely didn't mention: our land is allegedly about a foot from her house. Oh, that was fun to play around with, but that wasn't at all like the property she is actually trying to pilot from us right now. Indifferently introducing herself to a surveyor whenever we can find one and pointing out that she had her portion of the land measured in the past, thus subtly implying that there may be a property dispute after explaining what it might mean for anyone interested in surveying our land. This immediately turns off everyone, as you are obviously aware of why, and did I forget to mention that the landmarks from the bank surveyor conveniently disappeared before we ever built on it? No, they did in some way. That brings us to the conclusion of this story a few months ago. I apologize for the lengthy background, but I suppose we will never know in any case if we can even find someone willing to hire a surveyor, as everyone we have found so far has given us completely ridiculous rates because it would probably cost us as much as that piece of property is worth. Nevertheless, we are now saving money to try to recruit someone who is essentially risking their entire life here. Current situation: a few months ago, a very strong storm destroyed a tree in the contested area because it was right next to the road. The tree damaged some of our other neighbors' property across the street from us, and it also destroyed someone's brand new sports car as they were driving down the road. Fortunately, no one was hurt, and the cleanup took several days, which was just long enough for us to receive a bill for nearly $100,000. After we cleaned it up, negative compliance began to take hold, so just to give everyone some background, most home or property insurance does not cover damage to other people's property, even if they are on public property like a road. If you could have reasonably prevented the damage, like chopping down a tree next to the road before it collapsed in a big storm, then you are fully responsible for the harm done at that location. Where I live, at least, that's how it works. We contacted them when we received the insurance bill for a wealthy person's damaged sports car in the mail, and we politely explained that the fallen tree wasn't on our property. They said they would investigate and get back to us after asking some questions. A week or so later, we received another letter from the insurance company that included a copy of the deed and property line printout, with the tree and issue circled in red, clearly on our property. The agent first argued with us, explaining in much nicer terms than I would have used that someone would have to be brain dead to believe that the tree and issue was not on our property and that it would be impossible for anyone to believe it was that far off on the printout. We then called them again to reiterate that it was not on our property, or else they would bring us before court or demand full payment within 30 days after their first warning, give or take. That was about 2 weeks from now. When I gave them the surveyor and third's phone, they moaned and said they would call the surveyor and investigate further. They also emphasized that we had about 2 weeks to prepare the money in case what we were saying could not be confirmed. In fact, we never heard from them. To recap the penalties I mentioned for giving false survey answers, the surveyor admitted to accepting a bribe, but there was no way he paid him enough to cover all of his possible losses at this point, and he would probably have to leave the country. He was not going to be able to give the insurance company anything different from what he gave us, or later, we called the insurance company to ask about the situation. After reading the notes, the agent clearly disagreed with the claim, just as we did, stating that the land did not belong to her and that the surveyor confirmed the findings with them. However, there was no reason at all for the insurance company to suspect the survey results were fabricated because we weren't challenging them and the surveyor was hired by herself. As long as we weren't challenging the results, they should be fully liable for any damage the falling tree caused, but they were only able to say that it satisfied us and that the aftermath was about what we had anticipated, even though they were obviously unhappy and had no significant issues paying the insurance company the money, as you can probably understand given my background. We have mostly kept quiet about the property dispute since then, but we are still considering saving money to hire a surveyor to reclaim our land. At this point, the focus is more on the principle than the actual territory, but we can tell every time she looks at us that she is obviously unhappy with us and that she seems to object to the fact that we allowed her to have our land for some unknown reason. We are not sure of their wealth or savings, but it seems enough to cover it without having to sell any more of their territory. Since it's free land, how could you be unhappy with that? LOL, she could try spreading rumors about us now, but it would probably backfire because most of our neighborhood has made friends with honest people and no one trusts them anymore. She is basically stuck in a difficult situation since they realized that she was stealing from everyone in the neighborhood right under their noses and they knew about it but did nothing to stop it. We are just watching the flames they set to the ground from behind. We decided to install an invisible dog fence for our dogs while considering a privacy fence. For those who are unfamiliar with the concept, it involves burying a small electrical line beneath the ground and then fastening a special collar around the dog's neck. If the dog approaches too closely, it will emit a beep that the dog genuinely detests. If they do not, the dogs will receive a mild shock. At first, we had to be persuaded. In any case, you should train the dogs to beep before letting them run free so that ideally they would never even experience shock in the first place. They would turn around after only hearing the buzzer. At the time, we couldn't afford a real privacy fence, but we still tried to let our dogs roam around our yard and avoid being cooped up in the house all day. We don't believe in shock collars, and one of us even held it and crossed the line, though it was something you could feel. It didn't hurt, it just left you a little tingly. We had it firmly within our own property because we didn't want our dogs to go anywhere close to one's land. It wasn't very long, but it was more than 5 feet past what she claimed to be the property line. She must have thought we were pointing out where we intended to put our privacy fence or something, and she ran over it with her lawnmower that day. We all learned that electrified cables don't work well with electrical lawnmowers, and her mower was completely destroyed, including all of its electrical components. She just wanted to be petty and run. The best part of it was that she had no way of trying to blame us because it was so far over the property line. She obviously tried to spread her rumors, but they rarely went very far, so it would have been foolish of us to blame us for not trying. She never even begged us to get her a new mower or anything, so I guess she knew how we would react if she did laugh. I hope you all enjoy the story. Another one deals with a different situation where my mother's malicious compliance cost her firm more than $100 million, which led to the complete and permanent closure of her entire department. It's late though, and I'm going to bed. I'll talk about that tomorrow, or else keep an eye out for it.